Welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today, we're going to be doing things a little bit differently.
Oh,
Yeah, we are going to be looking at poetry.
poetry.
Yes, poetry, specifically a collection called Prision de carne y sombra,
Oh, yeah.
which translates to Prison of Flesh and Shadow, and it's by an author named Yuzi Reyes S. Now, what's really unique about this deep dive is that this collection is not from a traditional publisher.
Right.
It's actually from Wattpad.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, Wattpad is a platform where users can share their writing.
Okay.
It's everything from like fan fiction to poetry to full novels. And so it's really interesting to see poetry in that space.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to how the digital age is transforming art, how it's shared and consumed.
For sure.
So to give you a little background on Wattpad, it's kind of like a social network specifically for stories. And Persian de Carne y Sombra has gotten 158 reads and 2 votes since it was released in December 2024. The synopsis describes the collection as a cry of despair turned into poetry, a journey through abuse and trauma where each word feels like an open wound.
Oh, wow, that's intense.
Yeah.
And even just the titles of some of these poems are so evocative, like Hierro en la garganta, which means iron in the throat,
Oh,
la llave sangrienta, the bloody key, and then un cuerpo que ya no es mío,
wow.
which is a body that is no longer mine.
Yeah, you can really sense the raw emotion just from those titles.
Absolutely. Just the titles alone give you a sense of the kind of weight that these poems might carry.
Exactly. And they really hint at the core themes of the collection. And then when you look at the tags,
Yes.
depression and poesia. So we're definitely going to be exploring some deep emotional territory here.
For sure.
One thing that I found really interesting is that there are 40 poems in this collection, and they were all published within a really short time frame, like 2 weeks in December.
Oh, wow.
To me, that suggests like an urgency, almost like the author needed to get these poems out in the world.
Yes, like a burst of creative energy right onto the screen.
Exactly.
I was also interested to see that at the end of the collection, there's an epilogue,
Okay.
which is titled Los Ojos del Abismo, or The Eyes of the Abyss.
Interesting.
And then after that, there's actually a message from the author.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I'm really curious to see how those elements wrap up the collection and what kind of connection the author is trying to create with the reader, by going beyond just the poems themselves.
Yeah, I think those are definitely going to be worth exploring. And it seems like the author wants to engage on a more personal level.
For sure.
One thing that I noticed is that you may also, like, suggestions next to this collection all seem to deal with similar themes.
Really?
Trauma, heartbreak, self-discovery.
Hmm.
So it's like there's a whole community on Wattpad that gravitates towards this type of emotionally raw and personal writing.
That's a really interesting observation, and it makes you wonder if this kind of writing resonates more in a digital space like Wattpad, where readers and writers can connect so directly and form communities around these shared experiences.
Yeah, for sure.
So, with all of that context in mind, are you ready to actually dive into some of these poems?
Absolutely.
Yep.
I think we'll find some really powerful imagery and some really thought-provoking themes when we look closer at the language and the structure of these poems.
Let's do it. Okay, so let's jump into the poems themselves. Where you want to start?
Well, I think Hierro en la Garganta is a really good example of how the author uses like these really visceral images to give you a sense of what it feels like to be silenced by trauma.
Right, and you mentioned the title earlier, Iron in the Throat.
Yeah.
Such a powerful image to set the tone for the whole poem.
Exactly. And when I was reading it, I noticed that the author keeps repeating the phrase nudo de hierro, which means iron knot.
Yes. And it creates this sense of constriction, like there's something heavy and unyielding that's blocking the author's ability to speak.
Right. And that repetition really reinforces that feeling of being trapped,
Yeah.
both physically and emotionally.
Yeah, definitely. And I also noticed a lot of imagery related to like darkness and shadows,
Yeah.
which also emphasizes this feeling of being lost and unable to find your voice.
Exactly. Like it's not just a physical sensation, but a psychological state as well.
Right. So you're saying that the author uses both these concrete images, like the iron knot, but also more abstract concepts like darkness to represent the complex experience of trauma.
Exactly. And I think this poem connects really directly to the overarching theme of prison de carne y sombra,
Yeah.
like literally being imprisoned by your own flesh and the shadows of these past experiences.
Okay, that makes sense now. La llave sangrienta, or the
Right.
bloody key, seems to kind of explore a similar theme, but maybe from a slightly different angle.
Yeah, you're right. There's definitely a connection.
What are your thoughts on that one?
Well, I think in this poem, the key represents a way out of this prison of trauma,
Right.
but it's described as being bloody and painful to use.
Interesting.
So it suggests that the process of healing and escaping the past isn't easy.
Right.
It's not straightforward, and it comes with its own scars and sacrifices.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting that the author chose to focus on the key being bloody, you know?
Yeah.
It really emphasizes the rawness and the pain involved in confronting these really deep-seated wounds.
Absolutely. And I think it hints at the idea that healing isn't always about, like, completely erasing the past.
Right.
It's about finding a way to live with the scars and make them part of your story.
Now, shifting gears a bit,
Yeah.
un cuerpo que ya no es mío, which translates to a body that is no longer mine,
Hmm.
really stood out to me because it seemed to introduce the sense of defiance and reclaiming agency.
Yeah, I agree. This poem feels like a turning point in the collection.
Interesting.
Even though the title suggests a loss of control, the poem itself is about reclaiming ownership of your body and your identity even after experiencing trauma.
Yeah, and there's that one line that really struck me. Reconstruyo mi templo con los escombros del pasado, which means I rebuild my temple with the rubble of the past.
That's such a powerful image,
Yeah. It's like the author is acknowledging the damage that's been done, but they're refusing to let it define them.
Right.
We're taking those broken pieces and building something new.
It really speaks to the resilience of the human spirit.
Yeah.
Like finding that strength in the face of adversity.
And this shift towards resilience and defiance, it seems to like really culminate in the epilogue, Los ojos del abismo, or the eyes of the abyss.
Yeah, it feels like the author is staring directly into the darkness of their past, but not with fear,
Right.
but with this fierce kind of acceptance.
I thought it was really interesting that the author uses the image of eyes to confront the abyss,
Oh, yeah.
because eyes are so often associated with perception and understanding.
Right.
And it's like the author is trying to understand their trauma to see it clearly so they can move forward.
It's not about ignoring or denying the past, but facing it head on.
Exactly. And I think the author's message at the end of the collection really reinforces this idea of acceptance and moving forward.
Yeah.
They express this gratitude to the readers,
Yeah.
almost as if sharing these poems has been a cathartic experience for them as well.
It's a really vulnerable message, acknowledging the power of sharing your story and connecting with other people who might have experienced similar things.
So considering all of these themes and the emotional journey that this collection takes us on, what do you think makes Prision de Carne y Sombra so compelling, especially considering it's on a platform like Wattpad?
Yeah, I think it's the rawness and vulnerability of the poetry. It feels very authentic. Like the author is pouring their heart out onto the page and trusting the reader with their story.
And that sense of trust is like amplified by the fact that it's on Wattpad,
Right.
a platform where anyone can potentially read it.
There's no barrier to entry. There are no gatekeepers deciding what's worthy of being published or not.
For sure.
It feels very intimate, like we're getting a direct glimpse into the author's inner world.
Yeah, it's like we're eavesdropping on a very personal conversation.
Right.
And I think the comment section on Wattpad adds another layer to that intimacy,
Yeah?
because readers can directly engage with the author and with each other.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
So it creates this sense of community around these shared experiences.
You've hit on a crucial point there, community.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that makes Wattpad and similar platforms so significant.
For sure.
They provide a space for people to connect over shared interests and experiences, especially those that might be considered taboo or difficult to talk about in offline settings.
It's like finding your tribe online.
Exactly.
And for someone who's dealing with trauma or other heavy emotions, that sense of connection can be so powerful.
Absolutely. It can
Yeah.
be so validating.
Yeah.
Just knowing that you're not alone in your struggles, and for aspiring writers,
Right.
it's an amazing platform to experiment, get feedback, and build an audience.
So Wattpad is kind of leveling the playing field for
Yeah.
both readers and writers.
Exactly.
It's democratizing access to literature and creating these new avenues for artistic expression.
I think that's something worth reflecting on.
Yeah. Yeah.
How might these platforms continue to shape the future of poetry?
It's a great question.
Will we see more and more poets choosing to share their work directly with readers online? Bypassing traditional publishing models altogether.
It's an intriguing question, and as we wrap up this deep dive into Prision de Carne y Sombra, I want to leave you with one final thought. If you're all intrigued by UC Reyes S's work, I highly encourage you to check it out on Wattpad.
Definitely.
Not only will you be supporting an emerging artist, but you might also discover something really profound about the human experience, about the power of vulnerability, and about the potential for healing and connection through art.
I agree.
So until next time, keep diving deep, keep exploring, and keep those minds curious.